Welcome to Becoming Untriggered, a podcast brought to you by psychodynamic coaches and parents of three, Lavinia Brown and Andrew Lynn.
Together we normalize and unpack common challenges faced by couples and parents, explore how these could be symptoms of unprocessed trauma, and support you with the tried and tested tools for you to show up as the mum or dad, partner, and person you deserve to be. Welcome to Becoming Untriggered. Today we're veering off from the norm slightly. We've got a couple as a guest on today's show, and we're going to be exploring the same themes as usual, becoming untriggered, both as a parent and a partner. And we're going to be asking the two amazing people that are in front of us today, Melissa and Bryant, how they've been getting on with triggers that have come up for them in their lives and how they overcame them and what tools they used, and perhaps at the end what they're finding challenging right now. We can do a little bit of live coaching, as it were.
Yeah, hi guys, good to see you. Thank you for joining us. Do you want to do a little bit of an intro, just like a top level intro into who you are, where you live, your situation with your children, how many you've got, etc., just to set the scene so people know some background?
So we live in Dallas, Texas, US. We both grew up here. We have two kids. We have a newly turned 11-year-old and we have a 3 almost and a half-year-old. We've been married for like 15 years.
Yes.
Been through lots of changes. Both had lots of crazy upbringings, and we individually found you guys. I found Lavinia from somebody talking about you on a podcast, which you then went on that podcast later. And so I just reached out to her. And then after doing work with Lavinia, I suggested strongly that Bryant maybe reach out to Andrew and see what kind of work they could do together.
Yeah, you're right. We have been married for 15 years. We've been together for 17 years. And as Melissa mentioned, my introduction to you guys was first as someone witnessing the transformation and the work that Melissa was doing with Lavinia, not necessarily understanding that there was a reciprocal or a counterbalancing side from the male perspective, or more specifically, not recognizing that much of the work that she was doing was necessary for me and my part. As she said, strongly suggested, otherwise known as insisted or a direct command, to explore this. And Andrew and I did a tremendous amount of work together over the past couple of years as well. And here we stand, still together.
I think that's a great place to start, actually, Bryant. Thank you for that introduction, both of you, because I would say, I want to say 100%, but maybe 99, I don't know. 99% of my clients that work with me have to force, or I encourage them, actually, don't hate me, to give their partners an ultimatum, because men often need their back up against the wall before they contemplate doing this work. Like you said, they often think, oh yeah, that doesn't apply to me. My childhood was fine. Or yeah, no. Whereas women are so much more open, I think, to the possibility that, I mean, maybe this is a male female thing. Like, it's a bit like when you go into a new job, women are like, oh, when are they going to find out that I'm the imposter? The man's like, oh, I got this job because I deserve it. And maybe that plays out a little bit within a work. So do you want to tell us a little bit more about why, given that you were both experiencing the same relationship, right? One of you was obviously experiencing it slightly differently than the other one, because that's why she encouraged you to look at this work. But what was behind your thinking that this wasn't perhaps relevant for you?
I love exploring this piece. You're absolutely right. I think it's whether it's the feminine disposition or just simply from the societal norms, there still exists this taboo of men have to just grunt and grind it out on their own. Because this is necessary yet incredibly hard work, men would rather just self-diagnose a clean bill of mental health than to actually dig into the problems that are there. And specifically in our relationship, Melissa, on the scorecard of trauma, she checks all of these boxes, whereas I wasn't necessarily willing to admit that or to understand that though they're not comparable, they are equally weighted, especially as they manifest in our relationship, the trauma and the dysfunction. And then with her insistence, I mean, I'm embarrassed to admit that it became a trigger for me during her insistence, even though we had gone to traditional counseling and therapy together, where we learned our interlocking dysfunctions and how they work. That insistence would trigger in me a very anti-maternal thing, where like, well, you're not my mom, so quit acting like it. So in that insistence, there was two beliefs. One was, you're not my mom, so you can't take care of me in this regard. Okay, thank you. I didn't sign up for that. And two, there was this belief that I was like, well, we willingly know, because of the scorecard I just mentioned, that Melissa may need the more work than I do. Right. And I'm embarrassed to admit that. I can admit that freely now, because I recognize how wrong that assumption was. And so overcoming those two things, and then her drawing specific experiences of the work that she's done and how I was interacting with our oldest at the time, really drew concrete examples of, hey, if this is working for me, maybe you want to look at it. Maybe you want to check it out. And then as soon as I had my hat in hand and had my first conversation with Andrew, I was like, well, okay, don't take this the wrong way, Andrew, but this isn't some egg-headed guy telling me what to do. This is someone who I can tell just from the relationship building aspect that he has gone through and going through the similar journey. And that's where I think men in particular, when we can look across the field and see someone else struggling, or look across the field and see someone thriving in the same area, in the same space as we are, we tend to connect a little bit more deeply than if it's just edicts or directives or blindsiding with particular advice and other stuff. To be able to look eye to eye and understand, okay, here we are as men, here we are as dads. And then when we also connected on so many other life experience pieces of what are driving us to this self-improvement and this self-development, it became obvious. I was like, okay, I'll be able to bring out what I would not even be able to bring out just in our relationship. Very quickly realize the level of effort that has to come from my side to just meet her where she is.
I just want to reflect one thing before you say something that I think was brilliant. What you said doesn't matter on the degree of trauma. I mean, it does a little bit, but the amount of trauma that you're bringing to the relationship doesn't really impact whether you're having an effect on the relationship. If I paraphrase that correctly, that yeah, okay, you may not have ticked all of the boxes. However, you were bringing your side, right? So yes, I love that.
Yeah, there's a couple of things just to take that a step further. Like sometimes I say to my clients who are in that situation, they're like, my wife, she had this really bad upbringing and she's always attaching to this trauma and she's loud. Now, at the end of the day, I said, you wouldn't be attracted to that person. You wouldn't be in a relationship with that person if you didn't have significant amounts of your own baggage, right? You just would have crossed past and kept on moving, but you connected to this person. You got into a relationship with this person. You have a trauma bond with this person. It doesn't work out that somebody doesn't have any trauma and they suddenly somehow by an unlucky set of events end up with somebody with a load of trauma. That just doesn't happen. The other thing is with men, I think there are some men that are attached to their trauma and aware of their trauma and want to fix it. But one of the things about trying to be a high functioning man and taking whatever you got in a childhood and making something better of it, part of that is that you have to deny some of your experience. And that's the thing that I think men do slightly different to women is we just suppress it. We're like, okay, that didn't happen. I'm just going to get on with things. Because I want to be successful and I want to make something of myself. And so I'm going to forget it happened. I'm going to deny it. So for them to, that have worked to some extent to create an external reality for themselves, to then have to go, okay, so let's turn around. Let's do a full 180 on that and start accepting or pulling apart the narrative I've had that's partly made me successful is really challenging for men.
I think women have that too. It's this like, I've got this far with these sets of tools. And yeah, it's not great and I'm not happy, but my whole life is built on this house of cards, even if I recognize that it's house of cards and what is behind it. Many of my clients are like, I don't know who I am. And I don't want to not be self-sufficient and highly sensitive and whatever else it is, because if I'm not, then am I just a lazy couch potato? Like, who am I? So I think men and women both, that's part of the resistance of doing this work, isn't it? That if you remove the resistance, how much of the resistance has become your identity and what are you going to find underneath? Melissa, did you have any resistance around, I really want to change, but I'm not sure what's on the other side? Is it worth it?
Yeah, for sure. Because it can be really scary to get to know those parts of you, especially because I think women, or at least I do, suppress things as well. So you don't know what's going to come up all the time. I think we could have gone on in a perfectly, maybe not the happiest, but, existence, having these independent lives from each other, being together. But it's not having the kids that holds the mirror in front of you. It's like, here's my dysfunction. I can't actually keep going like this if I don't want to ruin my children. Whereas if it's just two people in a relationship, those things are going to show up, but it's not going to be as amplified as when you have children in the mix. I think it's just a very big shift. I'm the type of person where once I notice something, it's like I have to address it or else it's going to drive me crazy. It could be, I need a haircut and I've got to get it done today. It could be very simple about it, but it's if I'm seeing the same thing over and over and my brain is telling me hey, we got to do something about that. I don't know if that would have happened if we didn't have kids.
Just to comment on that too, that's the point, is that we could remain immature and childish if we didn't have children, if we didn't have to become an adult and have to be a parent. At least in our relationship, but what I've noticed in talking and working with other parents is it's obviously the mother who begins to understand the impact of being a parent a little bit sooner than the father because of pregnancy and the postnatal care required by the mother traditionally, where the father stands back and sees something, in essence, replacing his role at her side. Going through and stepping into the roles of parent really caused reflection of, okay, what am I willing to take from my childhood and my parenting? What am I willing to get rid of? In understanding that set of values, and then recognizing how difficult it is to shed or even to try and find those things I'm willing to get rid of and not willing to pass. Oh, that for me, that became an existential piece where I was trying to understand who I really was in this role, and also resenting very much of her biological rite of passage and transition into her new role. Watching her not be frazzled by it, or at least not overtly frightened as I was. I don't want to grow up. I've got these tattoos and guitars hanging on the walls, and I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. And I just want to be a playful dad. And just in that realization of what changes the most is having to draw in that responsibility. And then to be driven by the fact that that's why we connected, is that we wanted to share a life. We wanted to be parents. We wanted to be in love. We wanted to build this together. And I constantly draw to that shared desire when times are difficult, is that we have chosen this.
So why don't we start there, right? So what were the biggest triggers? Maybe it's the same one. Maybe you share it. Maybe you don't. What was the biggest trigger for you in terms of having children? What did maybe either your oldest daughter, because that's the first time that we're exposed to having to be adults, like you said, or maybe your younger daughter? What was challenging for you and how did you overcome it? How did you relate it to, oh, hold on, there might be something going on here that reminds me of my childhood?
Yeah. How did you know it was a trigger? How did you know that it was not just normal interaction?
Looking back on it now, where I can look at it logically, when it's a trigger, it's more out of your control. It's something that can happen quickly. It's not something that's premeditated. So for me, and the way that I was parented and disciplined, when my daughter was talking back to me, I wanted to control her. I really wanted to control her because I was parented in a way that kept me completely out of control. I was spanked. I was locked in my room. Things that make a child feel completely out of control and terrible when no one's coming to get them. And so as soon as she got into that defiant, even as a 2-year-old, all I wanted to do was throw her in a room and close the door and just leave her. or, I wanted to like spank her, which we never were a spanking family, but that was my initial instinct. And it's not because I thought that and wanted to think that, it's because that was ingrained in me. That's how I was treated. I feel like at each age, that same trigger can come back up and you kind of might need to address it again, because maybe that was the age where something significant happened to you. I don't know if there's a lot of merit in that, but it seems to me like, okay, I could feel really confident and like, oh, I'm doing so great. And then we hit this next developmental leap in her life. And I'm like, oh God, here we are again. I was just thinking about that this morning, is that, okay, well, now I feel better about my 2-year-old, but my 11-year-old, I'm like, oof, I don't know. I'm not feeling so confident in my ability to keep my calm as much with her now that we've hit this kind of new level of 11.
Why do kids change? Just when you've got it nailed, there's a new personality that you have to learn all over again.
Yeah.
Exactly. And they're just trying on all of these different roles. We find that some of these roles are abhorrent, and it is our responsibility to make sure that she doesn't go out wearing a role that she would be resentful of us allowing, right? We don't want to willingly provide a clean path for an asshole to leave this house. We want compassionate. We want curious and courageous, but we want a needless asshole walking out of the house, adorning our DNA and our family. And because of that new roles and the shifting, she is just as volatile and explorative, if that's a word, as we all are ourselves. We just have much tighter bounds now. And you're talking about the trigger. What I recognized for me was 2 things. One of them was there were instances where I kind of abdicated my role in the discipline of her, meaning that, okay, this is Melissa. She's got it. This is better that mom is handling this, because dad traditionally, when I grew up, was the man who grabbed the belt. Wait till dad gets home. Wait to this. And I've never been in that role as myself. Even though I try to end things, I also start things. And because of the corporal punishment piece that we had opted completely out of, I abdicated, and I chose not to be as assertive in some of the discipline pieces for many years because I felt like she had it. And then the trigger came from, this is the second part, the trigger came from when I started to recognize that either Melissa was doing things that even in her own mind, or even on our conversations afterwards, were things that she felt like were antagonistic to her values, yet she was in less control of. Or the second one, which was mostly the trigger for me, was I'd recognize the discipline or the actions that she would take and how similar they were to the ones my mother would take. And I would be confronting the impact of that on me. So for instance, if I expected Melissa to be more nurturing in a situation than she was, I would turn around and I would see, okay, this is like a deficit from where I expected my mother to be more nurturing or more safe. Or the opposite of where, okay, she's smothering her right now, she's got to toughen up. Well, I would recognize that that was something that I was having to work with. Now, I wouldn't immediately recognize I was not that literate in my own personal language. It was through the work with Andrew where I started to understand that I could identify where that trauma was and how I'm projecting that to her or on her. And I would also say now too, that still is a recurrent trigger, because what we've also done is that we've recognized that our oldest has a similar reward or learning system as I do, if you will, right? Which is interest based, not necessarily extrinsic. It's intrinsic. It's that if she can hyper focus on something, she would be happy and creative. Because I now have this one-to-one connection with her and our similarities, and now that I have a deeper connection with my own inner child as we move into that conversation, I recognize my inner child looking and seeing himself in my child. And so when there are these I wouldn't say mismatches, but when there are these trigger type moments where I can see perhaps that my inner child is now affected by how she's parenting my actual child, that's still something that continues to bring its way up, and know that, okay, first, I may need to talk to the inner child and let them know, hey, she's not talking to you.
I love that. So for Melissa, you felt out of control, so you needed to control. And for you, it was Melissa is my mum in the way she's acting, or I don't like the way it's reminding me of my mum. Yeah, classic.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear how your journey, from your perspective, of how you overcame that. Because like you said, the themes reoccur. The goal of this work is not to never get triggered again. It's to have the tools and the process and the awareness to notice when you're triggered and move through those moments so they don't actually affect you. It's more of an internal experience than an experience that affects you and everyone around you. What was your journey like, Melissa, with that particular wound, and what tools did you find most helpful?
I guess like in working with Lavinia, we did like a lot of journaling on the certain events that came up. She always said like, okay, you feel this way out of control. When did you feel this way? When you remember a time when you felt this way when you were younger. So trying to pinpoint some things and then bringing yourself in a quiet place into that event and trying to be there again, trying to feel what you feel, trying to like, I guess, reprocess it again. And then coming in, after you've kind of gone through the emotion of the event, inner parenting after that. We did a lot of that. We did a lot of inner parenting before you go to bed at night or each time, which this is a tool that I need to remember often, is doing it in the moment. Whereas I still get caught in the moment. I just like, all I can think about is we have a toddler that's potty training. It's first you realize you've done it after you've done it, and then you realize that you're doing it while you're doing it. And then you eventually realize as it's coming on, and it's still a work in progress. For me, it's still the hardest thing is like realizing I'm in it and like, why am I arguing with this 11-year-old? It's the same. Why am I arguing with this 2-year-old? That is still a hard thing for me at times, just depending on the moment. But it is like revisiting, giving yourself space to revisit the moment in a quiet space by yourself, do journaling, do whatever, close your eyes, be in the moment, feel where it is in your body, feel all the emotions, and then that inner parenting after, and finding what that inner parent is. Is it some faceless, nameless spirit? Is it a certain person that made you feel safe in your life? I always thought that was really interesting, like where the brain goes, what that entity is.
I love it. And this helped you manage your need to be in control better because that need ultimately wasn't there as much?
Sure. I mean, just a little bit of background on me is that I lost my parents very young. So by the time I was 2.5, my dad was gone. He died of cancer. By the time right after I turned 12, my mom died of cancer. So one of my biggest struggles with therapy and with coaching with Lavinia was I lost my mom young. There's where I think the trauma is. The trauma is from losing my parents. I've got my mom up on this pedestal. I lost her at a young age. Gosh, she was so wonderful. And then you start digging into, but she didn't parent me very well. And she had her own trauma that was put into that.
Did that inner work help you to then not get triggered by that same behavior? Because that's what all the mums and all the dads are trying to do, right?
Right. So because I did not have great parenting, even when it was around, and then it like stopped abruptly as I was younger. And then I was given off to older siblings who they didn't just get a baby at 20 something years old. They got an angry 12-year-old, So it's like, I didn't have anyone telling me these things about safety and, I was enough or, whatever the phrases that needed to be heard. So I found that to be very helpful, and it seems so simple and it almost seems kind of silly at times. So a lot of times I would do it at night and it would just help me like drift off to sleep because it's make yourself feel safe with these like affirmations or whatever it is. Imagining whoever it is you need to imagine saying that to you. And so it does help you to like feel just more secure and safe and definitely less triggered.
The affirmations, they can seem silly, they can seem simple, but actually you did a lot of work to get to the point where the affirmations work.
And could be received.
Exactly. Because everyone talks about, positive mindset, look yourself in the mirror, tell yourself you love yourself and you're great. But in order for that to hit home as it was for you, you got to hold space for your inner child. You got to build trust. You got to release all the emotions. You got to develop a relationship. And only then is that part of you able to receive those affirmations.
Going back to the inner parenting piece is your inner child has to learn to trust you, and you have to learn to trust yourself, and you have to convince that inner child that you are a good parent, that you can be. And unless that relationship is resolved and built on trust, then those affirmations or those things as the inner parent wants to take control, it's empty. And the suspicions of the inner child will be as reflective as the suspicions of your child when you're acting out of character and that rapport isn't built. That was one of the biggest insights for me, was to understand and carve out and define the edges of who I was as a parent and project this ideal and be able to start talking to myself using that ideal as the inner parent. It came so close to the surface and so self-identified, or so close to my own identity, that now that's all I intend to project when dealing with my kids. And then those affirmations, the things that built the most trust with me was just simply telling myself that I was enough and that there was nothing wrong with me. Because my background is I grew up a typical kid in the 80s and 90s who had a little bit more energy, a little bit more creativity than some of the other more docile school kids. Was diagnosed with ADD at the time, and then later defined as ADHD at the age of 6, and took medication for 12 years. So with that, I had a deep-seated core belief that there was something wrong or different with me, that I had the incapability of doing things the same way as others, and therefore not only felt like the world was comparing me and judging me, but I felt like I had to do that. In fact, I remember very specifically Andrew just simply reflecting like, hey, you've come quite a way with this mindset. You're highly functioning. You should be proud, but also recognize that you deserve much of what you have to be proud about. And that was a simple mind shift change to me that I knew needed to happen. However, I didn't think I was capable of until I had him kind of reflect back, and the trust that was built not only between Andrew and I's relationship, but the trust that I had built with my inner child and my inner parent, was to understand that there's just as much wrong with you as everyone else in the world. So therefore, you are enough. You've got this right. And that itself was, again, going back to the point that you guys had earlier, that Andrew made earlier, is that it required a lot of work for me to trust myself to do that.
Yeah, I think you deserve so much credit for that part of your journey. It's not, you're giving up part of yourself to enable to heal the other part of yourself, your inner child. It's amazing to be able to do that. So many people are tightly held, and I think you were to some extent really tightly entwined with that diagnosis, which happens to a lot of people. And also that as part of your character. And a lot of people, which again is highly functional, turn it into a positive. They're like, it's a superpower. It's this, it's that. And, it helps me be creative. And it's so intertwined a lot of times with people's identity. And you can be all those amazing things without the diagnosis. But that was an amazing part of our journey together when you said, okay, I'm giving that up. My inner child is more important than this label and this part of my character.
I think we've talked about this before, and I think this reflects how women are more relational. Our identity is more linked to how we relate to others, and men are much more singular. I was talking to Andrew the other day about a client that had just set her goals, because I set goals with my clients, and I said something about mother and partner, and he said, oh, did that come into the goal? And I'm like, every single one of my clients has that as part of the goal. It's to be to be, in fact, it's always the same. It's variations on heal my past to feel safe in order to be a better mum and partner. That's the goal that all women want. I was like, don't your guy clients want that? No, it's all about them. I'm like, wow, that's so interesting. And you've described that beautifully. I said, what was your biggest trigger, Melissa? Oh, it was the way that I was showing up with my child. What was your biggest trigger, Brian? Oh, the way that she annoying me, right? Men have got this very different approach. Like you said, like losing part of your identity. I don't think women lose so much part of their identity. We want to show up for others better. It's very different.
It's a very specific wounding that we're talking about. But your point is right. The journey for men to turn up in as better partners and better parents is through being the best version of themselves. So the destination is the same, but it's very interesting how people like you said, how people get there via different motivations.
Well, because mother and wife or partner is part of our identity, because we relate. The female, feminine relates to others. It's who we are. Whereas the man, I think, is more individuated, identified by himself, not himself in relation to other people.
Right. I think it's from the male perspective too, I think we put so much emphasis on our agency, on what we can control of ourselves and how much power we have. And so therefore the introspection is like, what can I control? Who am I? How do I show up for myself? And not in a selfish way, but more of like, okay, how can I shoulder this? How can I grunt through this? How can I work through this on my own?
It's just an interesting side note is noticing that like, okay, he was inner parenting himself, whereas I was choosing an alternate figure to inner parent me. Is that usually what you see? Or do you think there's a benefit to having yourself inner parenting versus this image of someone else or something, whatever it may be?
We talk about this a lot as well. I teach that the inner parent is outside of you, is not you. Because my women clients are so used to giving. We're very good at that. What we're not good at doing is receiving. For my clients, I feel it's easier to get as a concept if the inner parent is an unconditionally loving other, because that's not what we got. And yes, relating, we want to be nurtured in the way that we have to nurture other people. Andrew does it differently. You teach that it has to be you showing up for you. But I do think that mirrors, the masculine and the feminine. I think I was saying to Andrew, women can't inner parent themselves often because we have no role model. It's like, and why would we? It's much nicer to receive, and that softens us more into our feminine. The feminine is meant to receive. That's what the feminine does. If you think, sex, for example, the feminine receives, the man gives, right? It's a different dynamic. So that's why I do it that way. So yes.
And do you think that's just as effective for a woman to do it this way and a man to do it this way? Do you think it has any difference? Should I eventually be inner parenting myself one day? Like, do you think it matters?
I think in the end, it's all the same. You're basically imagining it, right? It's still in your head, whether you imagine it's someone outside or inside. Once you've got the hang of it and that connection is there, then if it feels more appropriate to be you, then if you want, but I don't think it's better. We are the ones that have to show up for our kids day in, day out. What I don't want my clients to feel like is like, oh, this is another chore. I've put my kids to bed, now I have to put my inner child to bed. Like, another person is dependent on me. Like, oh my God. This is their chance to be like, look after me. And I don't think men have that specific need.
No, I don't think men need to do it to start. I mean, I have a slightly different opinion to Lavinia on that because I've watched Lavinia with her journey, and I do think she now inner parents herself more than uses an external force. And I'll tell you why I think eventually, when you can, there's a benefit to it because it helps you stay in the present moment when you're triggered because you're the inner parent. So you are the presence, the safety in that moment, rather than being in the inner child and looking for the external safety. You can stay in the safety a bit more. Like you said, that's really difficult in the moment. It's a journey to get to that point in time where your part of you is always present and witnessing. And again, we talk about this quite a bit, but I think women, it maybe even biologically, they're much more closely attached to their emotions. So they're much more likely to feel something and attach to it and act on it straight away. Whereas men are maybe there's a few more steps in there. I'm not sure what it is, but we find it a bit naturally easier to witness what's happening, witness the emotions, which is the observer, which is the parent.
So experiment with it. I mean, I do a combination of both. I know, like when I'm looking for a parking spot, I'll have my inner parent in the seat next to me going, it's okay. We're going to find one. We've got this. You've got this. We're not going to be late. So I have an external, very much so. But yeah, maybe more in terms of triggers in the day to day. I am now more able to have that internal observer. I think having the flexibility of being able to choose is a good thing. Maybe men don't need that flexibility, and we do.
for a lot of men is that they don't know how to do it, but they tend to channel what they do with their children. So they'll be a lot more compassionate and loving and find it easier to hold space for their children than they do for themselves. We kind of join in their inner child with their children and try and recreate that behavior. That's like the stepping stone to parenting your own inner child.
And also the women I work with tend to have had, like you said, Bryant, more evident trauma, signs of trauma. So speaking for myself, I didn't even like myself. I loathed myself before I came across the inner parent. There was no way that I was going to start loving myself. It's like, I don't even want to. I don't know how to. It's not happening. So to have someone else love you, that's like, okay, fine. If she wants to love me, fine. You have a go. Let's see how long you last. Because your inner teen is like, I'm not receiving that love, but it wears you down. I couldn't have started with an inner parent that was myself. It wouldn't have worked. But maybe that's because I attract women that have got more trauma than men. We don't know. We haven't actually had a couple yet where the man's been more traumatized.
So let's move on to relationships, because obviously this really affects how we parent, but it can affect the relationship. Were you guys aware? I mean, obviously you weren't aware when you got together, but doing this work, can you look back now and witness where if there was a trauma bond in the relationship and how it worked out, how it rebalanced itself and where you are now with it?
The only thing that pops up like immediately is where he was talking about seeing me in his mom's role. That was a thing where I told him when we were getting together and we were going to move in together, we were going to get married or whatever. I was like, you must move out of your parents' house. You cannot move from your mom's house into my house. Because in dating him and when he did finally move out, I could see, those habits. And then when moving in the house with him, I could see like, oh, these are still here. And I have felt myself or him projecting me as that role for him sometimes where I'm like, I don't want to be your mom. I want you to take care of your own stuff. But I feel like that's definitely a role we probably struggled with. But I feel like where he would resent me for being like this motherly role. But it was like, well, if I'm not taking care of these things, they don't get done or, whatever, especially early on. Things have changed quite a bit. Can you expand on that?
I can expand on that particular piece because I had a playbook for the external requests, such as getting the clothes into the hamper that was 4 feet away from the wad of clothes next to my side of the bed, or cleaning up or dusting, or there was very much of the playbook, the tapes that were playing over and over again that I knew, okay, I kept my mom at bay long enough to where she would just simply do some of this shit. When it became a reflection of my self-worth that I wasn't able to accomplish these things first as a child or as a teen or even as a failure to launch type adult, to have it reflected back to me now that I was paying a mortgage and a parent and, an adult, that was tough. And I only had the playbook that I had from my relationship with my mother to, all right, I'm just going to sit back. I'm going to disassociate and I'm going to resent. I'm going to sit here and be like, all right, you can't tell me what to do. I'll show you how I do the laundry or how I do the dishwasher. I'll show you. You can't tell me what to do. How that particularly changed was the full admission and understanding that I did not want my wife to take over the role of mothering me. And what that meant was, again, that wholehearted admission, like, that is not what I want. That is not what I need. Recognizing the areas that I was deficient and willing to improve and capable of improving, and also recognizing that I still had a chance as an equal partner to negotiate some of these areas and be like, okay, I know I suck at putting the laundry up, but I'm damn good most of the time after a few times of reminding of taking the trash out. That was certainly a primary thing. And it still continues to work its way in now when she's parenting our oldest, for me to understand that she is radically different than my mother. We have this partnership to where we continue to go back to moments on this very couch and talk about the negotiation of both of our roles, the expectations that we both have for ourselves when we're away, and then the expectations we have when we're together, and then continually recommitting to those expectations. That continues to be one of the main triggers or a prevalent trigger. It's easy to scoff at because it is such a clinical platitude, if you will, that Freudian thing of like, oh, here's my mom, here's the Oedipus thing going on. All right, great. For me specifically, it was embarrassingly predictive of how our relationship would have continued if we had not addressed this. And I had recognized that this is a thing. This is a block. This is something that I have to work at least as much as Melissa, if not more, to overcome. And we still work on it every damn day. I'm happy to report there's only a few things on the floor right now next to the bed. We've also, in that negotiation, brought the hamper a little closer to my side of the bed and those kind of things. But that's just a fun example of it. But it does proliferate throughout almost all aspects of our lives.
I think it's an example that every couple in the world.
I recognize the universality of it, especially seeing y'all's face and nodding as well.
The interesting thing about it is that it's the thing that causes the conflict in the middle of the relationship, right? But actually the trauma bond is that you're both attracted to that part of that person.
Right. Right.
So Melissa's looking at you going, I wish I could just chill the fuck out and not give it shit. And you're like, I really know I need to buckle up and get organized and like sort my shit out and be an adult. And I see that in her and that's what I want. So the trauma bond is seeing that thing in the other person that we're attracted to unconsciously, then turns into the conflict in the relationship. And it's about being aware of that's what happened. Oh, okay. So it's kind of inevitable in a way that happens in a relationship. What I find interesting is that this is often the thing that breaks the relationship. This thing in the middle, the washing, the nagging, the list, or the whatever it is, it can break there. But actually, if you can get through it like you guys have and take responsibility for both parts of it, it can be the making of the relationship. Because if you do the work, you end up rebalancing. So like you said, Brian, okay, now I'm growing up now. I'm stepping into my masculinity. I'm starting to make the lists myself and whatever. You know? And Melissa, you can find more surrender and you can find more time for joy and relaxation and you can even each other out.
I always talk about how our relationship is where it is today in this. First, the acknowledgement that she sees a much better version of me and I trust her of that vision. And that it is, whether she likes it or not, it is in her job description to continually provoke that. That's the positive way. I needed someone that had a career, but met me in a bar. I needed someone that was paying her bills so that I could maybe float in and not have to worry about it. But also, it's in the recognition of that's something that I wanted for myself that began to grow the appreciation of her in her effort to provoke again that more ideal version of me. I always talk about build the padded walls so that you can lose your mind, but you have to build the padded walls for safety first. And that's what I found in her was here is someone who has her shit together and quite a bit outwardly, of course. But and so much of that too was in our relationship very early when I recognized the trauma that she had again on that scorecard, as we call it. That was like, wow, that enlisted her to be the provider of that stability or to build those padded walls for her. And now I can come in and I can be free to go crazy, if you will. Thank goodness. Me, a failing musician at the time with no steady job or steady income, to see that here is someone that I can connect with on a very personal level, but also one who has at least these few areas of deficiency under control. I recognize the intense magnetic attraction to that. It took me many years to understand that what I was giving to her was some of that sense of whimsy, again, that libertine lifestyle, and her ability to safely not give a fuck at certain times when she would allow it. And that's where that magnetism is still to this day pretty much pulled apart, or it's impossible to pull apart.
Safety without rigidity. When you've experienced trauma, a lot of rigidity comes in. It's your armor, rules, boundaries, routine. Things have to be a set way. It makes you feel safe if no one has given you that feeling of safety, and you've given her that safety without those rules and regulations, or to a lesser degree. That's beautiful. Yay. Oh, well, thank you both so much for being so honest and vulnerable and sharing not only what's come up with your kids, what's come up together, your trauma bonds. You've been amazing, really self-aware and open about your struggles and your journey. So thank you so much. It's been, I'm sure it's super helpful for whoever else is going on the same journey.
If anyone else is watching that's got any questions, just leave that in the comments, or you can contact us.
If what we discussed was helpful, please subscribe and leave us a 5-star review. For more of the same, check out my social media, The Inner Child Healing Expert, or to work with me, go to laviniabrown.com.
You can find me on andrewlynn.net or Life Coach for Dads on Instagram. We work with both individuals and couples. If there are any topics you'd like us to cover, please reach out. Thanks for listening.